So last time we left it off talking about cancer and meat and some of the issues around the epidemiological studies that make all the headlines around the world. And you've just told me you've just finished a great interview. So would you like to talk about that for a few minutes?
Absolutely. Yeah. It wasn't very recently, but I did an interview with Dr. David Kurfeld. So he's a USDA researcher, PhD scientist who was actually on the 2015 working group that the WHO put together that decided meat was a carcinogen. So all the things you've heard of are all stemming back to this one decision by this panel in 2015. Okay. And he was on that panel, and he is, a balanced diet guy. He's like, he's kind of like a middle of the road guy. He's not like Sean Baker, yelling at everyone they should be eating all meat. And he was saying, hey, these people are ignoring me. I'm bringing studies to the table. They're not using in the, everyone was supposed to bring studies and they were going to analyze them all. They were throwing them out. They were using epidemiology. They were using rat models. He was saying, here's some human studies. Here's this. They wouldn't look at it. And he also said it was just a whole bunch of vegans and vegetarians that clearly had an agenda. And he said, they were out to lunch, and he tried talking to them about it, and they were openly talking about their vegan agenda. So it was pretty interesting to get it from his point of view. And he's written some interesting articles since published, I forget where, but I just say, look into that more and just know that it was not good science that they used, and that it was almost 50-50 on studies showing either way, even the ones that they did use, and that it really doesn't make sense to blame meat on cancer, or it does, right? It's the simplest way to think about it, that any, school person could, like middle schooler could figure out, is meat is something we've been eating for all of history. And the other competing hypothesis would be it's processed foods that cause these cancer. And these have been around for 100 years. So it's super simple when you think about it that way. So
what do you think? Why do you think there's such a strong ideology behind the anti-meat agenda?
That's, wow. Yeah. I mean, entire books have been written on that. And I've traced it back to around 1880s. And there's a great guy, Dr. Gary Fettke, and his wife, Belinda, that really get into this. So I would track down some interviews. I interviewed them on Peak Human podcast. But there's a religious aspect to it. And there's a Seventh-day Adventist. And in America, they had this idea. They started this religion as a woman, Ellen G. White. I mean, it's a long story. I don't want to get into all of it, but just know that there was this sort of religious idea that meat made men violent and angry. And this was around the time of women's suffrage movement, and women were trying to get more rights. Like, it was bad for them. They were getting beaten by their husbands, and they didn't have a lot of rights, and they blamed it on meat. They didn't really have the science. So it was like meat and alcohol. They kind of lump those together, that people, it's like, oh yeah, the husband eats a steak and, drinks a lot, and then, gets angry. So it's part of that. And it kind of moves on into the 1920s, and Kellogg's is a whole story of, the big cereal companies and General Mills and Kellogg's, and it's a whole thing.
Cornflakes to stop masturbation.
Exactly. It's all connected, and it's really interesting. So I would encourage people to look into that. But then it kind of moves on. The quick version is every decade almost it changed, and people blame meat for certain problems, right? So even masturbation, meat was blamed for masturbation. It was blamed for carnal, these urges. And then it went into the 50s and 60s. And this is the time when we were doing all these big studies with Ansel Keys. And there was this idea that meat caused heart disease. And this was also when all the smoking, right? It's been about 10 to 20 years of heavy smoking where everyone was just smoking indoors. You could go back and you see these, it looks insane nowadays, people smoking in elevators and smoking in airplanes. But, likely it was the sugar, the processed foods, and the smoking that was causing it. So, but they blamed it on meat. Then it goes to the 60s, 70s, the hippie movement. And then they started getting, meat's bad for the environment, and then they go that route. And then you get later into then you start going to cancer. You start going into just any number of things, just even obesity, like vegans will try to blame it on obesity, but basically it's always these two sides where it's this plant-based agenda type of thing where I feel like they've just kind of been led astray, and, so that they have this idea and they've gone down this path, and they have to blame everything on animals, right? So if you take those people out of the equation, you really have no one against meat, right? Everyone else is like, yeah, we've eaten meat for all of history. My grandparents were healthy and they ate meat. This is what I eat to be healthy. I don't get it. So, yeah.
That's interesting. That's a good segue into my next question, because a lot of the vegans, or in New Zealand, there are a lot of people starting to turn towards plant-based diets under the impression that it's really going to help their health. And one of the defining aspects of that for them has been the Game Changers movie. And it's been very popular here. And I get so many people saying, oh, that just completely changed my mind. And then the China study is the other one that they've been exposed to. I know you've done a lot of work around looking at the Game Changers, and I know you've got a very good podcast, don't you, about that, which I'll link to for people as well. But would you like to just make some comments around that?
Yeah, sure. I actually made a film. I mean, it was not a real film, it was a YouTube film called Game Changers Debunked. And the community supported me, and we made it in about 22 days, I think. And it was, a film in response to most every point that they made in the film. We had doctors, scientists, and people refuting those points. And we showed studies. So I would say, first of all, go on YouTube, go to the Food Lies YouTube channel, Game Changers Debunked. And we have, I think, 150 studies linked to that video that shows, our research and our studies that we're basing this on. And so we completely refute the whole video. And then also, yes, I did a podcast with Dr. Paul Saladino about, there was a big interview on Joe Rogan's podcast. There's a debate between the filmmaker and Chris Kresser. So we broke that down in a podcast. So the highest level view is that if you start to get this idea that it's all based on animal rights, right? Animal rights activists. So then you get this idea that animals have rights and we shouldn't eat them, which is going against all of human history. That this is, we shouldn't treat animals badly, but it's part of the circle of life. Like, this is a natural part of our food chain that we can't get out of. All death, to have life, something needs to die. It's just an inherent law of nature. So at the very top, it's these people who, care for animals. And I agree with that, but at some point we have to eat animals to survive. And so when you start going down this route of, if animals bad, meat's bad, and plants are good, then you kind of start backfilling all your information to fit that narrative. And then you could say, oh, so if grains are good and, sugar's fine, and they have all these ideas. So it's just the meat and the saturated fat is bad. And it kind of makes sense in a way, because if you're in their twisted way, if you're eating a whole bunch of sugars and grains and fruit and vegetables and all this stuff, some good, some bad, and then you add on a whole bunch of bacon and you're like dripping with bacon, then maybe it is bad, but it's a combination that's bad. It's not the bacon. Right? It's like, if you're eating a high sugar, high grain, high starch diet, and then you're eating a high fat diet as well, that's a combination that's making us all sick. And that's the problem with the world. But it's not the meat, right? They got it backwards. The meats, the animal foods, and the fat are the most nutrient dense, bioavailable, everything we've been talking about in the first part of the episode. These are things we've been eating for all of history. And the high sugar, high starches, all that stuff is brand new. That's the stuff we shouldn't be doing. So if we have this combination that's bad, it's very obvious which one you need to remove. And everyone in our community removes sugars, refined grains, seed oils, but they're looking at it from the backwards, opposite, twisted view, where they're saying, hey, let's keep all these sugars and refined, grains and wheat and all this stuff and remove the animal foods. So I see their point, and they're doing it for animal rights, you could say, but they just have it backwards. So I hope that explains it, because sometimes it doesn't make sense in your head, because you're like, oh, well, I saw my friend, my neighbor, my aunt went plant-based and she lost all this weight. And, it can work temporarily because you're eating more whole foods and you're taking away that killer combination that I'm speaking of. So yes, it can produce weight loss in a short term, and you can, do better in some diseases in a short term. The problem is it's not a human diet. Humans, like we said before, we have all these morphological changes and gut and this, that require us to eat animal foods. So in the short term, you can see some temporary improvements because of calorie restriction and other things, but it's not the healthy way to go long term. Basically, it's a fallback food diet. We developed the ability, humans are really adaptable, they're amazing. We lived all over the world in all different conditions. And we have our first diet, our primary diet, that's of animal foods and has some other nuts and seeds and little, berries thrown in. And that's our primary diet that we thrive on. And then we have a fallback food diet where we can, in times of famine, when we couldn't get an animal, when there was, some extreme environmental circumstance, and we had to rely on a bunch of like leaves and some tubers we dug up, we could do it, but it was temporary. So that's the big thing, is people are getting tricked by these vegan propaganda films because it temporarily can work, but they don't understand that long-term it doesn't work. It's insufficient. It's not a human diet. And no one knows that because these vegans, they keep cycling through. They try it for a little bit. They feel great. Then they ruin their health. Basically, my clinic with my business partner, Dr. Gary, we have to heal people from the vegan diet. Our job is to fix them. People don't know this, that we're sitting here undoing all this damage from the vegan diet, but people don't know about it because they try it. They feel good initially because they've dropped so many processed foods. Then it stops working, or either they just want meat and animal foods because it's healthy and they realize that, and they just go back to an omnivorous diet, and they ditch it, or some people like buckle down and really do it for a long time, and then those are the ones who get really sick. So that's my high level spiel. Don't get tricked by the game changers. We debunked all the science. We have 156 studies, I think it was, to back us up, and just know, I hope that makes sense, right? This high level view makes more sense of why it's all happening.
That's great. Thank you. And I will link to that little short video you made for YouTube. Yeah. And also to your podcast with Paul Saladino. That'll be great. And probably the one with on the Joe Rogan with Chris Kresser would probably also be a good one for people to listen to who really want to sort of understand a bit more. So, I mean, the way I explain it to people is if you put carbs and fat together, it's like putting petrol on the fire. You just get this big inflammatory reaction going, and that starts to lead to, the poor health outcomes that we see. So we did touch in our first section a bit about nutrient deficiencies. Do you want to just talk a little bit more about, if people are going to go a plant-based way, what they must supplement with? Because I don't think a lot of people realize that it comes along with a requirement for supplementation.
Yeah, I guess if you're really dead set on doing it, you can, number one, I said the first time, B12. B12 is absolutely necessary. A lot of problems with people with B12 deficiencies. You want to get some iron, right? You're not getting the good source of heme iron from plant foods. They have a different source. People think, oh, spinach has iron in it. You're not absorbing all that iron, for one thing. And it's also not the good iron that your body needs, heme iron. There's another one in spinach too, green vegetables, vitamin K. Vitamin K1 is what's in plant foods. Vitamin K2 is basically the one in animal foods. The K2 is the one that you need and is much better and bioavailable to your body. So you're going to need K2. Even the vitamin A, you're getting the precursor form of vitamin A in plant foods, but you really need the real vitamin A that's in animal foods. I don't know you probably need some zinc. You need some, DHA. I don't know how you're going to get DHA. That's a huge one. And we talked about in the beginning about seafoods and these foods in the brain. You need this DHA. This is the real form of the like omega-3 that you need in your brain. So I maybe some people can supplement it from algae, or I don't know. I don't really get into all these like wacky supplements that people need for vegan diets, but I would say really, if you really want to be plant-based, I know a couple of people who are plant-based. They don't eat sugars, refined grains, or vegetable oils, and they eat oysters every once in a while. Once a week, they're eating some mollusks, oysters, clams, like mussels. These have they have a lot of B12, a lot of zinc, a lot of these things that aren't in plant foods. So I'd say, and they don't have a central nervous system. So a lot of people say, hey, this is sort of a cruelty-free way to get these really nutrient-dense things.
And eggs would be another option as well, although
absolutely eggs, but some people, they just won't do it. They're not going to do eggs, they're not going to do milk, but just do the mollusks and the oysters and all that type of stuff. Get that seafood, you'll get a lot of the things you need.
And what about protein? Because protein's been a bit vilified really, and pretty misunderstood, I think, and plant-based proteins are not nearly as bioavailable as animal proteins. Do you want to talk about that, about the essential amino acids? And
so they're not as bioavailable and they're not as complete. So there's two problems with it. So some people know that if you are plant-based, you have to do a lot of food combinations, and maybe you can get a complete protein kind of if you get beans and rice as a simple combination, and you kind of make up that full protein spectrum of amino acids. But really, one of the main problems that I'd say is you're getting a whole lot extra energy to get to the same protein. Does that make sense? So there's this idea of the protein to energy ratio. And so in this case, the energy source is a carbohydrate. I like to, kind of be agnostic, like carbs and fat, they're both energy sources. So you don't want to overdo it on either, really. But if you're eating a whole bunch of beans and rice to get, say, I want to get about 140 grams of protein a day. I'm, about 150 pounds, something like that. And I want to, I work out. I want to get a lot of protein. That if I ate that with beans and rice, I'd be getting, they're so poor in those proteins and amino acids that I'd have to eat bucketfuls of beans and rice, and you're getting all that extra carbohydrate energy. So unless I'm running a marathon, I'd just gain weight to get enough protein, right? So this is a lot of time this happens. You see people plant-based, they're just overweight because they're trying to get enough. There's something called the protein leverage hypothesis, actually, where your body tries to get enough protein to survive. And so if you have these foods that are low in protein and high in carbs, you're having to overeat calories, basic carbs, energy to get enough protein, if that makes sense, right? So if you just eat a steak, you have the correct amount of food, you get the correct amount of protein. If I eat a whole bunch of beans and rice, to get the same amount of protein in that steak, I'd have to eat a bucket of beans and rice, and I'm just going to gain weight. So that's part of it. Yeah.
I did a little sort of infographic about that at one point, looking at using the leucine threshold to determine the protein availability. And I think, sort of one meal you would, say with a steak or something like that, you'd be eating 300 or 400 calories or maybe 500 calories. And if you use quinoa, you're going to be up to sort of like 1,000 calories. And I forget how many cups of quinoa that you would have to eat.
It would be an absurd amount. That's exactly right. And leucine is a good one to use. I've had some great interviews with protein and muscle scientists. There's a guy, Keith Barr, and a guy named Stu, blanking on his name right now, but Professor Stu Phillips, right? And they are really interesting in talking about proteins. If anyone wants to learn more about that, I did 2 podcasts with them. But yes, the leucine is what you need for muscle protein synthesis. And you're not going to get, I know you want muscle. And there's a whole other topic of maintaining muscle as you age and how important it is especially for older people to maintain their muscle mass. And to maintain your muscle mass, you need adequate protein, you need protein muscle synthesis, and therefore you need leucine.
And muscle is the organ of longevity, as they say.
Absolutely. Well, as we know that is, but very few people know that's the organ of longevity.
Mm, mm. So that brings us into talking about some of the chronic diseases that are related to diet, actually. You know, one of my questions is, why should people care about that? You know, they can just take their metformin and they can take their statins and they can take their anti-inflammatories. You know, why should they care about changing their diet?
That's a great question. It's the hardest thing to do, really, is to get someone to change their diet, to change their lifestyle. So, and this is this thing I've been wrestling with for a long time, because I understand the sentiment, right? Is that people, it's hard and we try to solve everything with a pill. And so, and with food, you can get away with things and you don't see the consequences, right? This is like one of these big inherent problems with what I'm working against, trying to change people's diet and lifestyle habits, is that they can eat something for a week, a year, even a decade, and not really notice the consequences, but they all catch up to you eventually, and it's too late. Right. So I don't know how to convince someone of this. You can't, just hold a gun to someone's head and tell them this is how it works and this is what you need to do. They have to kind of find it on their own, or you have to look at anecdotes and, other people's circumstances and things that happen to them. Right. And you can, hopefully that will warn you if you have your mom or your uncle or someone who had these chronic diseases. Hopefully, if you're smart, or if you know some good doctors that can help you analyze what happened to them, then you can understand that it was from their diet and lifestyle, and that it was a slow process, and that these, masking it with the medications you mentioned aren't the same. And that I know we were just talking about Ben Bikman. Dr. Ben Bikman's great. I know you did an interview with him. He actually sent me this book. I think everyone can order it now. Why We Get Sick. So he's talking about the root cause of this stuff is insulin resistance and hyperinsulinemia. Now, these are the root causes of basically all of the chronic diseases. And I've just started the book, but I know him well and his thoughts, and it actually aligns all the great doctors, scientists that I've ever talked to, the 150 people I've talked to, they do kind of align on this, that this is the root cause of most diseases, even the cancers and Alzheimer's that we don't really connect with diet and lifestyle related, but it's the hyperinsulinemia, the insulin resistance, and these are caused by sugars and refined grains and the seed oils. And we have evidence on all sides of those three things contributing to this root cause problem. And you can't mask that with anything. If you can kind of mask it, and people know that type 2 diabetics use insulin, exogenous insulin, but that is only making their problem worse. It's making, it's technically keeping their blood sugar in check, but it's not solving any problem, right? It's not solving the root cause, and eventually it catches up to them. And we know that all the higher mortality, people get, arms and legs chopped off because of type 2 diabetes. So
I think that's a really important point to touch on, and I might just go over that again with you. So for type 2 diabetics, and even for type 1 diabetics, and lots of type 1 diabetics tell me, oh no, I'm a type 1 diabetic, I've got to stay on this very strict diet. And we can see that their abdominal obesity is increasing over the years, and their amount of insulin they're using increases over the years, and they really don't understand that insulin is what's driving these diseases and these comorbidities, isn't it?
Absolutely. So even type 1 diabetics, I should share a great, I guess it's a blog post by this guy, Marty Kendall, and his wife is a type 1 diabetic, and he's a great sort of researcher that's not a real PhD, and breaks it down well, is that his wife halved the amount of insulin she used when she started going on a low carb diet. So you know what I mean? These diets don't just work for type 2 diabetics, but there's great benefit to controlling the amount of insulin you use and they need, you need to take less if you're not eating all the sugars and refined grains and stuff like that. And that long term, you'll be much healthier. Like you said, that you won't progress into using more and more insulin and then more and more problems if you eat this proper diet. It's pretty interesting, actually, that, well, I call it the sapien diet because I just think it's what Homo sapiens should eat. But everything we're talking about, type 1 diabetes, we're talking about cancer, we're talking about Alzheimer's, we're talking about type 2, this, that, everything, it all kind of comes down to the same way of eating. It is just a human diet. It's not hard to understand, right? It's like, this is just the way that humans eat, and we try to get away with eating other things, and it's delicious and it's fun and it's everywhere, but it's just not right. And some people can get away with it for longer than others. Some people are, like Michael Phelps swims, 10 hours a day and eat pizza. He eats like, famously when he was in the Olympics, however many years ago, he's like, oh, he eats like 8 pizzas a day and like 10 sub sandwiches. Okay, great. That's not how it works for everyone else. And some people, he's obviously working out way more than some people, and other people, maybe they just have good genetics where they can tolerate some of these high starch and high sugar diets for a while, but it eventually catches up to everyone.
And I think as we age, we need to pay more and more attention to our nutritional quality, because when we're young, we've got a lot of hormones driving us, driving growth and muscle mass, and we can tolerate more carbs. Like you say, we're probably more active. But as we get older and older, that all changes. And so we really need to be paying attention to our nutrient density. We need less calories and better quality calories.
That's right on. Yeah, it's almost like linear. As you age, you just can tolerate these bad foods less and less. And so it's a great way. It's like, it also kind of works out. People kind of wake up, right, as they age, as they realize they can't get away with things, or that their health declines. But it doesn't have to decline.
That's great. So one of my main focus with my Healthy New Zealand Challenge program is the kids, because I look at the statistics for our kids and it just breaks your heart. I've got 4 children, I've got 4 grandchildren, and I don't want them to end up with all these chronic diseases and really a wasted potential of their lives. But it's hard. It's tough to change what we've been feeding our kids, or to go against sort of what society deems appropriate. Have you got any advice for parents? Any suggestions?
Yeah, and I do talk to a lot of people about this, even though I don't have kids, I'm not married, but I've seen it work. For one thing, I've seen it work in a lot of young people just eating a human diet, sapien diet, right? There is no downside. There's no, it's not dangerous in any way. I mean, maybe you don't want to have kids on 100% carnivore diet, like some people do these days. But if you're eating natural foods and animal based, that is 100% what humans have done for all of history, right? So just know, for one, that it's perfectly safe and perfectly healthy if you do it correctly. And don't just eat, burgers all day and nothing else. But I think you need to find a community around you. I guess that's my best guess, because I've talked to a lot of parents, I've interviewed a lot of people, and the ones that do it well are ones that surround themselves with people who understand this, right? So if you are doing it with your family and everyone's on the same page, and then your kids go off and they're eating Doritos and pizza and junk every second at someone else's house, then it doesn't really work. But if you find a few people around you who understand this, and then you can, make it more fun and make it more sustainable or doable. Like, even I know people will have like maybe a pizza party, but it's like, oh, we're going to make the cauliflower crust, we're going to make it together, and it's a fun experience, and we're going to use the good ingredients, and we're not going to, eat like the fake cheese, like the gross fake cheese. We're going to get the real cheese and put it on the pizza. And so I'd say is find people around you. I mean, even just doing it yourself beyond the kids it's good to find people around you doing it, so you can stay, on top of it.
I absolutely love that you said that, because I think in my work over the last 30 years, we're always working with individuals. We're trying to change an individual's behaviour, and it's really difficult for someone to change their behaviour in the context of a community that isn't on board with what you're doing. So I think that's a fantastic bit of advice there. And people can make their own online communities and things like that, or join other communities that are out there.
Absolutely. Or just even, don't force it on people, but if someone's, you have a friend and family who's interested in it, maybe you can, help them, expose them to the right information and help them on their journey.
And I think keeping an open mind about the information as well, because we get very tribal about what we believe. And, you mentioned Sean Baker earlier, and I think Paul Saladino said he'd introduced some honey into his diet, and, then he gets attacked. I think keeping an open mind and just keep trying things and listen to everybody's point of view, I think is pretty important.
Yeah. I'd like to do that. Yeah. Just take in all the information, and then you'll have your own journey and you'll figure it out for yourself. And, that's what I've been doing. And I suggest everyone else do it. Don't just listen to me, but, take in all the sides and then figure it out for yourself.
So carrying on with that theme, you have the Sapien program, and that's something that people can sign up to and have access to you and the team that you have around you. Would you like to explain that for people? We'll make sure that we post where they can sign up to that.
Sure thing. Yeah, we're doing it open to worldwide. It's sapien.org is the easiest way to find everything, just sapien.org. And I've been working with my doctor partner, Dr. Gary. We have a clinic in Los Angeles, and we've been doing it with patients and, having great success. Part of the things we really want to let people know is to make it sustainable, make it a lifestyle, right? You can lose weight on any diet, but that doesn't mean it's healthy, and it doesn't mean that you're going to keep doing it. So our whole program with Sapien is all the stuff we talked about, is eating nutrient dense foods and all this, and learning about why you're doing it, but it's also how to do it sustainably, how to make it a lifestyle, how to, really not just do it as a quick fix and then go back. So many people do that and they go back to eating the way they used to eat, but with some small changes that I don't think are very hard. I think it might take some time to get used to. Maybe you can't eat Doritos anymore if you love Doritos, but we're going to replace that with something that you could like just as much. Maybe you can have bacon, right? So it's not any worse. I'd say it's better. It's delicious. It's nutritious. So that's kind of the goal here, is to just meet people where they're at. We're not saying so many diets. I think I get really heated about all these other wacky diets, like even the vegan diet. It's like people don't want to do it. They don't want to only eat plant foods. I mean, inherently it's not human. So many diets out there. It's like Weight Watchers, just counting the calories, like Jenny Craig, like all these wacky diets over the years. They're forcing people to use so much willpower. They hate it. They can't do it. They stress about it. It's such a negative part of their life. And food and health should be fun. It should be easy. It should be natural, right? If you're eating how a human should eat, it's natural. And that's what I've found with all this is I'm not restricted. I feel great. I feel better than I've ever felt, and I'm not restricted. So I guess that's kind of what we're after in the Sapien program, but you don't even have to join the program. You can just learn about this for free, listen to my podcast, watch the film that will, be out, and do it on your own.
Great. And so the film, Food Lies, can you give us a bit of background about what that's about, and then how people can support you, because you're only getting funding from kind of the general population. You're not getting any funding from any food industry at all. So
exactly. Yeah. So I've been working for a couple of years. It's a long, slow process. Game Changers took over 5 years to make. So, we're hopefully twice as fast as them. We'll try to get it out in the next 6 months. And Yeah, we kind of go over the entire history of how humans should eat. Like what was then the whole evolutionary story that we talked about, then where we went wrong, right? And all the stuff we've been talking about of like why we thought meat was bad or all the bad science we did or where we went wrong. Then we go into the new science. It's like, oh, now we have all this new science. In the past 20 years, there's been tons of great science that has refuted all these, bad, low fat ideas, whatever. No one knows about it though. The general public doesn't know about it. So we expose all the new good science we have. Then we go into the environmental side of things because we want to refute these vegan arguments saying that meat is bad for the environment. And if you have ruminant animals, the cows and the lamb, sheep on grass, they help regenerate the soil. They actually help improve the environment. So, there is that environmental component that actually lines up with our side, because of course it lines up, because this is how the world has always worked. We've had these animals on grass around us, and it works. And we even touch on the ethical part. So we kind of refute the ethical side. I mean, a quick little anecdote is how many animals end up dying from growing crops. Like monocropping all your plant foods, actually far more animals die from different, either getting, chopped up in the combines, or they get starved to death, or they have to be poisoned. So there's far more deaths in, smaller animals if you're growing all these plant foods than if you just eat a cow that's been on grass. Then you have far less death. So that's how we kind of end the film is with this whole other side of things. And then we wrap it up into something that's easy for people to understand. Like some of these concepts I've been talking about is, like you said, the combination of the, you don't want that killer combo of the high fat and high carbs. So we kind of really try to let people know how nutrition works. And no, I don't think any nutrition film's ever done that. Usually they're either just really plant-based, or there's like a keto film out there that's just like, just go keto. No one's really trying to bring it all together and not really choose a hard side, but just show what humans are meant to eat. And that's what we're trying to do. And yes, we're not taking any money from any outside food companies, not even any production companies. I didn't even want to, use some production company that would have their own ideas and like, oh no, we don't like this. Like, why don't we do this? And I don't want any of that. So we're all funded by just people like you who are listening. And we have been successful so far, and we're going to get this out as soon as possible. And I think it'll really change the world, because I think we're going to go more mainstream than most films have ever been. We're going to go to Netflix, even though Netflix, I hear, rips you off, and you spend 3 years in something and hundreds of thousands of dollars in something, and they offer you like 50 grand.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
I think that's why some films don't even make it to the mainstream, is because, they just get lowballed by Netflix. But I mean, I don't even care. I'd rather just get it out there. So we're going to do it. Well,
that's great. Well, I've supported your film, and I would highly, recommend. I'm not sure if that's the right word, but anyway, if anybody else is really interested, I think it would be it's a really great, it's a small investment for a fantastic contribution that you're making to the whole nutrition industry process, our understanding, and it needs to be said, I think. So great work. Fantastic.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
Well, I mean, we were going to talk for another 30 minutes when we're going for 45, and I know you have some other things to do. I want to respect your time. I really appreciate you coming and talking to us. Can you just go over again where people can find you? And we'll make sure we link to all of that.
All super simple is any social media, just type in Food Lies and I'll be there, and sapien.org. Just go to sapien.org and you'll find everything.
Great. And I recommend your podcast. It's one of the best out there. You're a great interviewer, and you have people from all sides of the story. And that's what I really like and really value. It's not just a one-sided perspective. So I encourage people to get out there and have a listen.
Thanks. Yeah, that's called Peak Human. And yeah, I really do try to just, talk to everyone. I'll hear anyone's point of view.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Well, thank you, Brian. And hopefully maybe we might be able to talk to you again one day after Food Lies comes out and see how it all goes.
That'd be great. Thanks, Susan.